Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David here, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by Jeet Heer, who is the national affairs correspondent, columnist at The Nation, and also the host of the excellent podcast, The Time of Monsters, to talk about the mess that we're in. Jeet, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Oh, no, it's a great pleasure. I'm also a fan of this program.
Oh, I really appreciate that. I've been reading you for a long time, so it's really great to speak with you. Look, I mean, we got a lot of things to kind of get into, and before we really get into the nitty gritty, I want to sort of take a little trip into the land of imagination and learn a little bit about our friend Chuck Schumer's imaginary friends. Can you tell the audience who might not be familiar with that?
Sure. Going back at least to 2007, and perhaps a bit longer than that, Chuck Schumer's way of deciding political decisions is to start having conversations with an imaginary friends that he has. Now, this is a couple that lives in Long Island. Originally, this couple was known as the O'Reillys, but Chuck Schumer decided that was too ethnic. That this is Schumer apparently having the 19th century belief that the Irish are not white, but part of the lower order. And so he changed their names to Baileys, which to my mind reads as Irish but passing as white. Yeah. So the Baileys live in Long Island. I believe Mr. Bailey works for an insurance company, and his wife is part-time working as a secretary at a doctor's office. They're around 40, and they're swing voters. They, can go for either the Democrats or Republicans. And when Schumer wants to justify a turn towards the right, he says, "Well, no, the Baileys would not like that." So, in 2007, there's a New Yorker profile. Basically, the Baileys, they're kind of on board with torture. They're very worried about terrorism. And so we can't investigate the torture regime too much. And more recently, just over the weekend, in an interview with the New York Times, he mentioned that the Baileys, they maybe voted for Trump because of crime. Now, so that's one set of imaginary friends. But I think there's actually another set of equally imaginary friends, which is that in the same interview with the New York Times over the weekend, he mentioned that, the Republicans in the Senate, they're all on board for Trump now because his approval ratings are high. They're 48. But once they go down to 40, he thinks that they will jump ship and come work with the Democrats a bit more. And he says, as he's mentioned more than once, he's in the gym in his shorts and the inhibitions fall, which to my mind actually reads like, if we're talking about imaginary friends, this actually reads like a Penthouse Forum letter. Dear Penthouse Forum, I never thought it would happen to me, but I was in the Senate gym in my shorts and all the innovations started dropping, ... No, I want to say that even though these senators are real, his relationship with them is equally imaginary. That is to say that he is fantasizing that there is a cohort of Republican senators who are at heart moderate, do not like Trump, do not like what's going on, and are eager to work with Schumer and the Democrats. And they have to, just as electoral policy has to be geared towards the imaginary Baileys, political strategy in the Senate has to be geared towards these, I would say, equally imaginary friends he has in the Senate. Imaginary in the sense that I can imagine that, senators are glad handlers, will say nice things to each other to make each other happy or whatever, but not be totally frank about what is actually their desires and their political calculations. And in his case, Schumer is imagining Ancien regime restoration, that Trump will somehow magically not be a political force anymore. We will go back to the way the Senate was before Trump, or even before Mitch McConnell. We'll go back to the halcyon days of the 80s when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and others, got together for a beer and, hashed things out. This is all fantasy. This is, Schumer and other Democrats of his sort like to present themselves as pragmatists. And the reason I've sort of emphasized the imaginary aspect is that this is, as Zizek would say, pure ideology. This is purely in the realm of the fantasy desires. But you'll probably have more questions, but I can return to that because there's a kind of interesting Lacanian analysis one can do of the psychopathology of Schumerism.
I mean, I think that the imaginary friend thing is not a small matter. I mean, on the surface level, it's just very self-serving too, yes. Right? So, instead of it being like, oh, I had an actual conversation with the constituent that changed my mind on the subject, I had an imaginary one, and it just so happens that I'm doing exactly what it is that they want to do. I mean, in that New York Times interview, we played a good bit of it on the program earlier last week on Tuesday. And, one of the things that was really notable too is like a lot of the postmortems that we've been getting from a lot of Democrats, but especially from people like Schumer, is sort of, oh, we haven't really drifted too far from the working class as a party. We've just gotten really bad at messaging, and we just need new kind of messengers. I mean, as somebody who's watching politics closely, watching figures like Schumer and others, I mean, does it really feel like the Democratic Party has gotten much of a message from 2024?
No, absolutely not. And I do think that the imaginary stuff is a way of not dealing with the actual voters. And, like as a senator, you're pretty insulated. Like it's hard for ordinary people to talk to you. Schumer has even just canceled his book tour. So, because people will be protesting, like not his imaginary friends, the Baileys, but actual like flesh and blood human beings will be there and they'll be angry at him. And that is not a state he can stand. For my sins, I've been reading a lot of Marxist theory, people like Althusser and Lacan. And for them, the imaginary and the ideology go very close together. And there's this idea that there's something, the real, that is war, that is suffering, that is the world that we're kind of immersed in, but we create fictions to navigate through that and to position ourselves in that. And that the imaginary realm is a realm through which we can reconcile the disconjunction between what is real and what we desire. And I have to say, if I could get Chuck Schumer in for like a session with Lacan, we could maybe get somewhere, because this is like almost a classical instance of the ideological imaginary overriding everything. And Schumer's not alone. I mean, one sees this with people like Tom Friedman when they talk about talk to a cab driver and he said this, and what he says is always exactly what Tom Friedman wants to hear. There's among the ruling class, because they know that there's a real world out there of people who are in the grips of history, but they themselves are insulated and protected from that world, and they have to somehow navigate that difference. And it is through this construction of the imaginary friend. And on a more I would actually say that people like David Shore and Matt Iglesias are also creating imaginary friends. These sort of moderates that they create through data science, who just so happens always come to the political conclusions that they want to them to come to. But it's all a way for a class of people whose politics is deeply disengaged from physical contact with human beings, to somehow justify their own desires.
I mean, I'll tell you, to be fair to everybody, the role of the imaginary in American politics might just be a perfect essay or book, because frankly, even on the progressive Bernie socialist side too, there's a lot of imaginary too when it comes to the working class and the working class voter, right? There's a lot of this kind of imaginary conversation happening there as well.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, I should be clear that for someone like Althusser, ideology is universal. Like everyone has to create an ideology and these ideological figments to get to where they want to be, right? But I actually think there's degrees to which these ideologies are connected to actual material reality. There's ways of checking. I actually think that. There's some people are questioning the value of organizing, but I actually think one of the values of actual political organizing is that you come into contact with flesh and blood people, and you come into contact with people who don't live up to your ideals, who are not the Baileys, and you have to actually deal with them. So it is Schumer is a almost extreme pathological example of a political class that is disconnected from the actual work of politics, of engaging with other human beings and all the trouble that brings. I mean, I don't blame him. Other people are kind of messy and they make you uncomfortable or whatever. But whatever. But if you're a bloody politician,
they interrupt your book talks, which is a big sin, right?
Yeah. They want you to do things. They want you to if you're conflict averse, or if you have. I mean, we could talk about where the real actually plays a role. Because that's the other side of one of the Lacanian trinity, the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. And I wouldn't say that Schumer is not in touch with the real. He's not in touch with the real working class, but he's in touch with the real owners of capital, of Wall Street.
Yeah. Sorry,
hey guys. Sorry, I didn't want to miss.
We're happy you're here.
Matt is totally confused. What the hell is Jeet saying?
Well, it's an interruption of the real, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I just want to say, like, we can get back to Lacan, but do you think this is a instance of like a post Citizens United type of leader? Like, he seems completely not set for this kind of moment.
Yes.
In a severe way.
Yeah. No. I mean, it's partially Citizens United. I think is like one factor. I think just generationally as well. Like, he has a, he's what is it, 74? No, I don't be totally like ageist or whatever. Because I mean, I think someone like Nancy Pelosi is older and Bernie Sanders are older than Schumer, but they are more in touch with, like the actual world of 2025, right? But I think Schumer and Joe Biden, they came of age at a particular political moment where American institutions worked a certain way, and for them, that is the norm. That is the way things should be. And a lot of their politics is ancien regime restoration, right? I always use the example, after the French Revolution, they were like all these, they repeatedly tried to restore the monarchy in France, right? And you had these, Bourbons and Orleans who basically, the tagline was, they learned nothing and they forgot nothing, right? They learned nothing from the French Revolution. They thought they could go back and but what they didn't remember was all the rules and all the grievances that they had, which always led them to make the same mistakes over and over again. And so I think like it's not just Citizens United, like once Trump and that sort of politics entered, that sort of anti-system politics, entered the bloodstream, you had people like Biden and Schumer who basically thought the trouble is Trump. If we get rid of this Trump character, we can go back to the way things were. We can turn back the clock. We can like literally, go against history, which is like talk about fantasy politics, right? and one saw this like right at the start with the cult of John McCain. Right, in the first Trump administration, the cult of like, let's celebrate the Cheneys, let's celebrate the restoration of all the people who created the world that led to Trump's rise, right? And it is a fantasy politics, and Schumer still, I mean, in interviews today, he's basically talking about how, like once Trump loses his sway or his hold on the Republican imagination, that things will go back to the way they were. And I'm sorry, but time is linear. We only move forward. You cannot like literally go back to I would love to go back to the 1970s myself when I was a kid, but you can't. You can't. It's just not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really dangerous kind of belief that I've even over the past 8 years or so since Trump has been on the national stage have fallen into, being like, okay, when this is over, what we'll sort of go back to a former version. I think one thing that's really notable about Trump, apart from his like skill as a politician, is just like how naked politics have become, right? Because like an example I know better than a lot of stuff going on in Congress is like the Texas legislature, right? Which is always kind of nuts and crazy, and it's Republican dominated. And people are like, oh, well, this populist upsurge is like taking over the state and doing this and that. But it's just big money, right? It's like all these guys are just funded by major billionaires in this state. And it's just more naked in a way that like, even without Trump, that's not going to go away, right? The ability to sort of do politics and to buy politicians isn't going to go away. So when it comes to the Republican Party, do they just understand this new dynamic better? You said one thing that I think is notable about Chuck Schumer is he's very familiar with capital.
Yeah.
Because he's just sort of not getting the memo from the boss.
Yeah. I actually think that there's a disjunction between different types of capital that's maybe worth thinking about, which is that, in that post-Citizens United world that, Matt mentioned, you still have the old Wall Street that does want things to back to normal. They don't like government shutdowns, right? And they don't like Trump's tariff wars, and they're frankly frightened of that. And they have gravitated more towards the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democrats, like from a financial point of view, are doing better with Wall Street than they've ever done in history, right? And the politicians that rise within the Democratic Party is not an accident that it's a New York party, right? These are the Wall Street Democrats, Jeffries and Schumer and many others that rise. But within capitalism, you also have these new buccaneers, the new money that's in Silicon Valley, but also more traditionally the fossil fuel people. And they don't have a static view of the politics of the system. They're not necessarily so vested in the status quo, and they want to let's see let's do grab what we can. Let's let's have Bitcoin reserve. Let's maximize on our profits. Let's have Elon Musk, basically run the federal government. And so there's a kind of, you have two capitalist parties, the Wall Street capitalist and the Buccaneer capitalist. And a lot of what Schumer is doing is not attending to voters who are very mad about Trump and what the Buccaneer capitalists are trying to do, which is like really radically create a plutocracy. But Schumer's not listening to those people. He's listening to the Wall Street capitalists who are like, let's just keep calm. Let's just use the courts. Let's try to diffuse the situation.
And I mean, what's so fascinating about this continuing resolution on the budget thing is both the unions representing federal workers and the litigants representing Democrats in these court cases were saying, actually, let's take the shutdown. Chuck Schumer cited them and as reason to cave.
No, exactly, yeah. I mean, more imaginary friends. Like, instead of listening to the actual institutional, representations of class interests, you'll say like, oh no, this would hurt federal workers. Maybe the Baileys have like a cousin who's like a federal worker who's telling Chuck Schumer, I'll be hurt by this. But it is all. It's all incredibly self-serving, and then with the courts thing as well. I mean, like, if your thing is Trump is a threat to democracy, often use the rhetoric of fascism, but then like say, well, we don't have much political power, but we have the courts. But then you're also supporting a continuing resolution that will actually weaken the courts and like actually give legal sanction to a lot of what Musk is doing. What exactly are you doing? Like you're basically, but as I say, the ideology, the realm of the imaginary, is a way of reconciling the inconsistencies of real life with one's fantasy desires.
So, on that, I mean, talking about somebody who might be able to break free, or at least appears to, is Trump, right? And you wrote an interesting piece in The Nation is sort of about like Trump's relationship to some of these forces. I mean, there's two kind of dreams I think that like progressives, myself included, like have, is that like Trump is going to sort of have this big falling out with Elon Musk. And a lot of us thought that was going to happen quick. And I'm not saying it's not, but, it doesn't seem, at least, to be happening publicly. And that maybe, Trump just being a businessman was going to sort of work as a kind of a leash on him a bit. Could you talk about how you're sort of seeing Trump's relationship with a lot of those forces in the second term?
Yeah. I mean, one thinks about the restraining forces on Trump, I will say, on behalf of the Armstrong regime restorationists, it was the case that the institutional Republican Party in the first term did act as a check. Like Trump did have like some normal, Steve Mnuchin, right? Like, a normal Republican businessman who just wanted tax cuts. And Trump cares about the stock market. I mean, he cares about images. And if the stock market is going down, I mean, that seems to be the dynamic in the tariff wars, right? Like he'll like play up tariffs and the stock market will panic and then he'll pull back and then he'll like try again. But like in a lot of ways, like Trump is much more restrained from these forces than he's ever been. I mean, he is like, a second term president, and it's always a dream of Democrats, like, like Obama in second term, like he's going to be unchecked. He'll do what he wants. Well, what he wanted was the same thing he did in his first term. But Trump, like I actually think like Trump does have real goals and real agendas. And he's like, he's checked to some degree by, like Wall Street, but like to, like, like what, the Wall Street Journal article I quoted was basically saying like, unless the stock market goes down by 30%, people on Wall Street are afraid of speaking up to Trump. And I feel like that's the other element of the real, right? What is the real is the fear that Trump will sic the Department of Justice or antitrust laws or like whatever, or Elon Musk, like Elon Musk's social media power against anyone who challenges them within the Republican Party, within Wall Street. And so like there's like a lot less check on Trump than there was certainly in the first term. And I think it's important not to overestimate that. I mean, at some point, like, yeah, of course, Elon Musk is hugely annoying. And you can kind of see like someone like Trump thinking like, why am I spending time with this like clown? Why am I babysitting his kid? But, like Trump respects money. Silicon Valley is a big donor base and, and they're giving him money. All the sort of coin stuff, right? Like Trump is sort of openly praising not just like donor money, but like actual money in Trump's own coffers. Right? I don't know, man. I don't know what the checks are. Like, short of, I mean, the other check is foreign policy. Like if there's like an actual war, of Americans dying, that would be a check. But like, do we want to go there? Or I actually kind of think it's important. Someone like Schumer, to go back to him, keeps thinking that these other institutions someone else will do the work of politics. Like in the first term it was like Robert Mueller, now it's the courts and it's Wall Street and, like the stock market. Someone else will do what we're actually paid to do. And he comes up with these rationales to justify not doing anything.
Yeah. And, the last thing maybe to get into before we let you go here is that, since that vote, obviously a lot of people in the Democratic Party have been very public in criticizing him, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, he as you call in your piece, like he should resign from the Senate and from the leadership. I totally back that. But my question to you is that, like, is Schumer is the one who sort of took that position, but in the same way that like Manchin and Sinema, I think during the first Biden administration, were sort of characters who could be replaceable, right? If it wasn't them, probably someone else might show up to sort of be like the thorn in the side of that. You look at some of the things that we're hearing from other leaders in the Democratic Party or their pundits, is there like a lot of appetite in the party to sort of chart a different path? Or is Schumer, kind of publicly being the guy who's going to get sort of, dragged through the coals for something that a lot of other people in the party sort of want him to be doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, he is kind of taking on the scapegoat role. Unfortunately, it's the later. I mean, I think that the actual appetite for doing it's a very conflict averse party at a very dangerous moment where you actually kind of have to be taking stands. And what I see now is like an attempt, like, let's replace this old class of leaders, but let's bring up younger leaders who think the exact same thing that they do, right? Like there's a push for like having younger people run in the Democratic Party. But if you look at like who the party is promoting, like, it is like ideologically vacuous people who have,
Slotkin.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, maybe like not having this 74-year-old guy who looks like, like a half an hour with his grandkids would kill him is not the best person to have as your public face, but to have like a 40-year-old who thinks the exact same way, like it's basically just transplant Chuck Schumer's brain into a younger, maybe more nubile body. I don't think that is like a solution.
Yeah. And I think until the leadership stops listening to the advice of their imaginary friends and starts listening to what's going on.
Yeah. I know we're going long, but I mean, like the actual, the actual only solution, the logic of the situation, I don't know if it's going to happen. The logic of the situation is that you need a hostile takeover of the party. You need something like what the Tea Party and Trump did to the Republicans, because those movements came out of anger at the mainstream of the Republican Party. If you had something like that, where there was like actual challenges from the party in primaries and then in the presidential level, you could from people who are not beholden to the party, who are outside the party. I mean, I think that's why a lot of us were very excited by, like, say, Osborne's run, right? Like, if you could actually create political forces that, share the core Democratic Party values, but are not beholden to the party, you could get somewhere. And I think I sort of can conceptualize how this might work on a presidential level, which is I actually think that you need someone like Sean Fain or Sarah Nelson basically running as a union leader, I'm not a Democrat, and I want to take the party back to the working class. Like, I think someone like that could have could run a Bernie-style candidacy and win. And that might reorient the party. But then you also have to fight this, like, at every level. And I don't know if the infrastructure is there to, like, do all the fighting at the state level that we need. But, yeah.
I mean, I'll just say, like, I agree. I remember Bhaskar Sankara years ago sort of saying something along those lines. It's like, you need to have like a national figure for these kind of movements and kind of be mad at him. Like, no, it has to all be local. It has to all be local. And realizing over time, like, no, he was definitely right, because you saw what happened this most recent like election cycle when you don't have that kind of loud progressive figure on the national scale, on the presidential level. Things just kind of dissipate quickly.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, it's just a function of the media space and the nationalization of politics. And, like a lot of people who don't follow politics closely need a Bernie figure to orient them. And Bernie's like, playing a really good role right now. But, like, we have to be conceptualizing what is a successor to this that could lead a hostile takeover of the party. And basically, like, dispossess, not just Schumer, but really the consultant class that allows the Schumers to exist. So it's going to be like, like a long struggle, the long march through the Democratic Party, as Chairman Mao would say.
There we go. Well, Jeet here. It was really a pleasure speaking to you. Folks, you can read Jeet in The Nation and also check out the podcast, The Time of Monsters, which is, I really enjoyed the conversation you had with Danny Bessner recently.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
There'll be links to follow everything below. Thanks again, Jeet.
Oh, no, it was a pleasure.